My name is Charlene Margot, and I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture, an organization that brings you this program, the Parent Education Series. We could not be more delighted to have with us our friend Ned Johnson and his friend Katie Dunn tonight for Beyond Worriers and Worriers, Reducing Anxiety Around Test Taking. With more than 500 registrants, we know that this is a topic, especially in May, that is really resonating with everyone. So we hope that this will be a de-stressing evening for all of you, whether you are a parent, a caregiver, a student, an educator, or someone in the mental health arena. Again, just so glad that you can be with us tonight. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Menlo Atherton PTA, the Sequoia Union High School District, the Sequoia Healthcare District, the Peninsula Healthcare District, and this organization, the Parent Venture. We are very, very excited to have with us again Ned Johnson and Katie Dunn from PrepMatters. Ned may look familiar to you. He is a favorite of this program as the co-author of the best-selling books, The Self-Driven Child and What Do You Say, with his co-author, Dr. Bill Stixrud. Tonight, Katie and Ned will be in conversation for about 40-45 minutes, and then we really want to open it up to you, the audience. We have two ways for you to communicate with us. One is the chat button. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, but this is a webinar format. So we also have a Q&A. So please do put your questions for Katie and Bill and Ned, in the Q&A box. And you can chat to one another or ask logistical questions of us using the chat. My co-founder, Bev Hartman, will be putting resource links in chat. So do check that out periodically during the evening. At the very end, we will have like a 1-minute survey. We hope you'll take a minute to fill that out. All right, let me tell you a little bit about tonight's featured speakers. Ned Johnson is an author, speaker, and founder of PrepMatters, an educational company providing academic tutoring, educational planning, and standardized test preparation, hence tonight's program. A professional tutor geek since 1993, Ned has spent more than 40,000 hours helping students conquer standardized tests, learn to manage their anxiety, and find the motivation to reach their full potential. Ned is the co-author of Conquering the SAT and host of the popular Prep Talks podcast. He is a sought-after speaker and teen coach on topics such as study skills, parent-teen dynamics, and test anxiety. His work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, BBC, and many other outlets. As I mentioned, with his partner, Dr. Bill Stixrud, writing partner, I should say, Dr. Bill Stixrud. He is the co-author of the national bestsellers, The Self-Driven Child, and their latest book, What Do You Say? With Ned tonight is Katie Dunn. Katie has nearly 20 years of experience educating and advising students as a teacher, counselor, and administrator in the DC metropolitan region. She has designed high school transition programs, served on admissions committees, conducted interviews for college admissions, and helped students plan pathways to college. She is a frequent guest speaker on secondary education, education equality, and the state of college admissions. Katie is a native Washingtonian and graduate of Georgetown University and the University of Maryland. She holds master's degrees in English and art history and has extended her graduate study into educational leadership. Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome for Ned Johnson and Katie Dunn. Take it away, you two.
Thanks so much. We're delighted to be with you. We love the work of Parent Venture. And we're glad that all these parents are with us tonight. And we hope to share some stuff with you that's interesting and helpful for kids who may be in the middle of what's kind of a stressful part of life. This is a stressful part, right? Katie, as a college counselor, kind of intense right now?
May is tricky. We are smack in the middle of AP exams. So I think one or two students may be feeling some things this week. So hi, Ned, how are you?
I'm doing well. You know, I'm a little nervous tonight, but you know that's cool. We know the jitters actually improve performance. We'll talk about that later.
Right, we feel some things in our bodies when we're feeling stress or anxiety, perhaps.
One or two I've been told. It's also it's not so hot for test taking too. Last time I checked. So
it's tricky. I'm going to pull up some guiding work for us to take a look at as we talk through our conversation. So when you're taking a test, Ned, how do you feel?
Yeah, I get that a lot. You know, gosh, it was so much easier when I'm with you, and like and folks often think that the circumstances are so different, or the test itself is so different. But as we know, that might be the case. But a lot of it, of course, is what's going on from a brain perspective. So we like to take that stuff pretty seriously. The big sort of thing to know is that stress hormones are helpful to a degree, but in too much, they're not so great, right? We end up with, let's say we go to the next slide and we'll take a look at this kind of what goes on. When we're in our right mind, a little one more, that's such a pretty picture, I feel better. When we're in our right mind, the amygdala, which is the most recently evolved part of the brain, it kind of runs the show, right? The prefrontal cortex is where all those executive functions of decision-making and problem solving, mental and emotional flexibility. So we're coming up with a new solution, but also if things are a little intense, kind of putting things into context, putting things into perspective, come into play. So we hit the button, we'll see it's a hashtag I got this, right? One more, I think we'll get there. The amygdala, on the other hand, the amygdala is this very primitive part of the brain that is effectively a threat detector. And so it doesn't think, it simply it perceives and reacts to a threat. And the challenge is when this happens, that when the amygdala flares, the prefrontal cortex can be flooded with neurotransmitters, including dopamine and norepinephrine, and all of a sudden it goes offline, because in a crisis, you're not really supposed to stop and sort of ponder, geez, I wonder what's going on right now. You're supposed to, freeze, like don't let the bad guy see me or the bear see me, right? Get the heck out of there, or if necessary, fight. You notice that none of those things are particularly useful when taking a math test in school or writing an essay or college essay or SAT or ACT. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is kind of what causes these reactions, both in a specific way and kind of in a general way, and also what we can do to make these things go better. Because obviously we can't protect our kids from having stressful situations, including tests in school, nor should we, honestly. We'll talk about that more as well. But what we want to do is have them able to respond in a way that's balanced, right? But that's not overwhelming to them. And then they kind of crumble and don't do their best work.
Ned, my favorite example of this is about digestion. Can we talk about that for a second?
Please.
So one of the things I have learned in sort of learning how anxiety and stress and these chemicals impact your body is when you are living in a sort of a high level of stress, your body stops digesting very well. Because in fact, if you are running from a bear, it doesn't matter if you're digesting your breakfast, you're good. So I was talking about this with Ned the other day, and Ned, do you want to share the example you gave?
Oh, golly, what's the story I'm thinking now?
Oh, I can share it if you want. It stuck heavily with me. When you sit down to take a test.
Oh, yeah. Well, so yeah, I borrowed this from, so when your stomach drops, this is actually borrowed this from Ken Ginsberg. If people don't know him, he's a huge writer on resilience. And he's a pediatric psychiatrist, I believe, at Children's Hospital in Philly, and really wonderful. And he was talking about if you ever feel that experience when you're taking a test and your stomach drops, or maybe you get caught in a bad situation, your stomach drops. He explains that's all the blood going from your abdomen to your butt, to your behind and your legs, so you can like run like heck to get out of there. Was that the one you're talking about?
That is one. It feels so real to me that you can feel the energy in your body moving to where you would need it in a situation that your brain thinks you're in.
It is true. It is true. And I want to talk for just a moment about the differences between stress and anxiety. Stress is a response to a stressor, right? And so, you've got a soccer game, and it's intense. You're driving in traffic and someone lunges towards you and you want to respond quickly. And so stress is actually, we'll talk about this in a moment. It's neither good nor bad so long as it's in the right amount. Anxiety is something that's different. Anxiety is pervasive, and even when the stressor goes away, we still feel anxious, right? The American Psychological Association makes the point that a stressor, we experience stress in the presence of a stressor, but anxiety is persistent and it's excessive. And if it gets bad enough, it really becomes a disorder and starts impairing major life activities, because it leads us to avoid things that are otherwise healthy, but we simply feel this too intensely and we can't handle it.
That
There's a story-
definition makes sense, Ned. How do I know the difference?
It's a good question. The biggest thing is when the stressor goes away, does the stress abate, right? So we actually did a study some years ago with a friend who's a neuropsychologist, and she studies salivary cortisol. She does all these studies, and I don't have the data for her. I couldn't get it in the slide because it wasn't too pretty, but study kids, they took cortisol is the dominant stress hormone, and we can see it in our spit. So we brought in a bunch of kids and had them do a swab right before they took a test, immediately after they took the test, and then 20 minutes later. And so it's normal to be amped up before a test or a soccer game or talking to someone you think is cute. I mean, it prepares us for performance. It prepares us to focus, and it's awesome. However, when that thing goes away, then the stress should fall apart as well. If after the test or after the conversation or after the game, the stress stays really high and you keep beating yourself up over and over, now we start to have a problem, because the brain should be intense from things that are actually really, are threatening to us right now. But if we have this persistent level of stress, both in response to something, really ruminating, and in anticipation of something and kind of rehearsing disaster, we're going to have a problem. And beyond test performance, one of the things that Bill and I, in writing these books, were super concerned about is that the long-term effects of developing brains, of young brains that are being sculpted, being bathed in stress hormones, is really, really not good for them. It shrinks the hippocampus, the dominant memory center of your brain. Gosh, you kind of want to have that, right? It shrinks the hippocampus, or excuse me, it shrinks the prefrontal cortex, all those executive functions. And it makes the amygdala hysterical. It actually physically grows, and it weakens the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. When we're in our right minds and the amygdala goes off, the prefrontal cortex goes, oh, we've got a plan for this. And we jump into coping mode. And so the single best predictor of mental health is the strength of the connections between those two parts of the brain. So anxiety, it's persistent, it's pervasive. And kids also tend to make it very personal, like not just I sucked on that test, but I suck generally. It's fine to be upset about something that didn't go well, you made a flaw, whatever. But when you feel like this is saying something about me generally, and it's again, persistent, pervasive, and personal, this is when we really want to pay a little bit more attention. And we reach out to people who know these things, of your pediatrician, or maybe even a mental health provider.
Oh, trying to make it move and it's not moving.
Thank you. We all feel better. I was laughing when I was doing a little bit of research about the origins of anxiety and stress. A curious note in case people are interested, true fact, Katie, stress did not exist until 1936.
Huh. Fascinating.
That would have been great, right?
We had a couple world wars before that.
Well, that's true. That's an excellent
things
point.
happened.
Yeah, I guess that's right. So this is when Hans Selye, who is a Hungarian endocrinologist, coined the term stress. I take some note because I'm a test prep geek. This was also exactly a decade after the first SAT in 1926. So maybe it's not fair to blame the College Board for the creation of stress, but anyway. So if we go into the next slide, so this is really important for folks to understand, the Yatesdson curve. So across the bottom, we see arousal, and this is measured in cortisol. So this is the dominant stress hormone, and performance on the y-axis going up and down if you haven't done math for a while. And then what we can see here, I think if we click up a couple buttons, a couple more things will pop up. When the stress is too low, we're bored. We're not interested. If you play a soccer game or lacrosse or basketball against kids who can't even catch the ball, you're not going to do your best. You don't have to. They're not very good, right? You don't want to be in a math class that you get an A without even opening your textbook, much less your eyes, much less the textbook, because it's not challenging. You're not going to grow from that.
And what we see in schools when that happens is then I don't do my homework. And so then I'm getting a D in the math class that is far too easy for me because I am entirely uninterested in doing this work that I know is so stupid.
A really good point. And so Bill Stixrud, my writing partner, makes the point that the ideal learning environment, and the same thing probably applies to sports and music and anything, is one where we feel challenged, but we don't feel threatened, because without enough challenge, just as you said, Katie, nobody engages and nothing meaningful happens in terms of learning or growth. But if we feel threatened, then we're way off to the right side of this curve. And importantly, not only is performance lower, but the major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. And so this is kind of important for all of us as parents and educators to keep in mind, because a lot of times kids who look like, they're lazy, which is not a word that I love. People say they're lazy, they don't care enough. Sometimes it's not that they don't care enough onto the left side of this curve, but they care too much and they're way out to the right side of this curve. So paradoxically, and you really want to pay attention to this, if a kid is there, actually, when we lower the pressure and we say this matters less, it lowers the stress and it makes it easier for kids to be more focused and more engaged, because we say that it's less important rather than more important.
And I think one of the important lessons for me there, Ned, is always the behavior that I can observe as a teacher, as a parent, as a friend, might look the same on both of those far ends of that curve. So if I jump in with what I think is the right answer to addressing that behavior, and I'm with you on the word lazy, the vast majority of us want to be successful. Last
time I checked.
Mostly it's not lazy. I've had a lot of parents tell me their kids, I've had a lot of kids tell me they're lazy. Mostly that's not it. But if we have time for a quick story about that, Ned and I have talked about one of my favorite students before, who I think was really caught in this question. He was a young man who was in both his regular on-level English class as a sophomore in high school, and he was in a special additional kind of English learning lab class because English was not his strongest course. And the main teacher in his English class totally thought this kid was great, really got him. They really connected. She was super supportive. She really listened to him and helped him figure out how to be successful. And he had, generally speaking, a B in that class. His teacher in the learning lab class just thought he was lazy, thought he was obnoxious, thought he wasn't engaged, thought he didn't care. And he was failing that class. And so I got him in my office. I'm talking to him and I said, Eric, what's happening here, sweetie? Like, you're doing great for Miss V and you are tanking for Miss G. And he said, well, she thinks I'm stupid. And he was right. And I said, well, do you think she's right? And he got really quiet and he said, yeah, I guess so. And I said, well, I don't think she's right. And Miss V doesn't think she's right. Why are you taking her opinion over every other experience you have here? But it was because, as you said, like he felt challenged. English was tough for him, but he did not feel safe because that teacher didn't believe in him. And once we figured that out, we were able to name what his behavior was and find him some good strategies for it. And he graduated from high school with a B in IB English.
I love that story. The story this for me, part of the reason I first got into this, I started doing test prep in 1993, and I work with all these kids who are, they're from great families, they're from schools, they work super hard, they take the practice test, and then they perform ka-pa-chink. And I was like, what? And oftentimes to get this call from a parent, like, we spent all the time and money and I don't understand this. What's going on? And both I'm like, I don't know. I'm 24. What do I know? Right. And so when I was lucky, the parent would send the kid back in and we'd have a conversation, ask kind of what happened, what went on. And almost always it would end with something like, I don't understand. It was so much harder than what we did for practice. I'm like, oh, well, okay. I mean, I guess that makes sense. Wait, what? Because standardized tests, in my experience, have, not that much going for them. But the one thing you can say about standardized tests is, gosh, they're mostly standardized, right? So the idea that one test was so much harder than another, this was actually how I kind of got into this. And so I was, mid-20s, and I went to go and take the SAT. Actually, we're taking the SAT on Saturday, aren't we, Katie? This is going to be so good. So I went to go and take the SAT in my 20s, and I'm sitting there shoulder to shoulder with all these teenagers, kind of eavesdropping, wondering what's going through their head, how stressed are they, what are they thinking? And for no particular reason, I checked my own pulse, and it's 140 beats a minute. Now, as you know, Katie, and my wife can testify, I don't have that many identifiable skills, but I've always been pretty good at standardized tests. Like, what's going on? And the reality is that we can be stressed and still perform really well, but it's really individualized, right? I could handle what was a stressful situation, not because of the test, honestly, but because of being an old guy in a room with a bunch of teenagers, which was kind of weird. But our reaction to stress honestly has to do with whether our performance in the presence of stress has to do with how much we feel in control, how much we feel like we have the skills to handle this. And so this is where you can see a kid handle really high pressure in sports, but not, to your point, in English, or really high in, public speaking, but not in singing a song, or in singing a song, but not in public speaking. And it's really individualized. As Amy Armstrong said, it's kind of the prefrontal cortex, the Goldilocks of the brain. And you can't tell me what's good for me too little or too much, nor can I do that for you. Let's go to the next one and look at talk about individual differences for a minute. So this is really important. So first of all, on average,
Oops, sorry.
We got so excited by that. No, we're great. On average, this curve, what I call worriers, and I'm going to talk about the genetics of this in just a moment. On average, girls and women are a little bit more to the left, and boys and men are a little bit more to the right. This is why moms kind of anticipate things, and then you got to get on this, and the kid's like, it's fine, particularly if it's a son. Now, these are on gross averages, right? It's not the case that all women are to the left. I mean, you're, Katie, obviously, someone from my experience with you, very much a worrier, can really thrive, even under really intense pressure. But just for us as parents to know that on average, girls are a little bit more to this side and boys a little bit more to that side. But there's actually some really interesting brain science behind this. There's something called the COMT gene, the catechol-methyltransferase gene. That's a lot of words. And it's a gene that regulates how the prefrontal cortex metabolizes dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Meaning, do we have the right amount? Do we have the Goldilocks amount that Amy Arntzen said? Do we have too much or do we have too little? Worriers have a gene by which they metabolize dopamine and these other neurotransmitters slowly. So they only need a little bit of oomph to go, this is important, I better get on this. Worriers, like, term paper's not due for 3 months, who even cares, right? And so worriers need a little bit of oomph to get on the thing, and the worriers are kind of the more procrastinators. And so without pressure, the people with the slow acting variant look superior. The higher IQs, blah, 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 blah. But under pressure, it flips. And the worriers, they are now all of a sudden excited. They have enough brain activation to really want to jump in and care about this stuff. And the worriers who look so great under pressure, like I was talking about those kids a while back, all of a sudden they're practicing here and they go there. And so it's rooted in this particular gene and a lot of other parts of the brain. So there are huge individual differences. And this is why it's just important for us as parents or as teachers to know that my subjective experience is not everyone else's. This is one of the real pitfalls of standardized tests is by definition, they can't be objective when there are such enormous differences in the subjective experience of people taking the test. And so as parents, as educators, we do want to be very sensitive to that because what we're of course interested in is all kids doing their best, no matter what their brain chemistry is.
And I think we want to think about that construction on how we share advice without trying to control behavior. Mm-hmm. And how we try to, and maybe read this book called The Self-Driven Child, but how we try and make the student or our child help us identify and understand what they're feeling and where they fall in some of these categories. So we know in a guidance way, how we can be helpful in helping them kind of manage their stress. Ned, do you want to tell our viewers here what the molecule is up there at the top?
So we have a colleague, our director of education, Dr. Aaron Golumsky, who actually got his PhD in chemical engineering out there in Berkeley, not far from you all. That is the molecule of cortisol. I could have spent the rest of my life and I couldn't have constructed that, but he pointed out to us. So
never would have known, but now we've got it. And now I know what that looks like. So how do we understand how these things impact us as you know, anxiety, as you've said, is a pretty clinical, complex problem. But where does this fall into us with stress and anxiety and how we can see what's happening?
It's a great question. Again, for all these things, we know that we're not trying to avoid all stress because stress is, Lisa Damore would say, is what we experience when we're at the limit of our abilities, right? So when we stretch ourselves and socially or musically or athletically or academically, and this is a good thing, the challenge is we want to have it in this right amount, right? So this is this nuts acronym is Sonia Lupien, who heads the Center for Study of Human Stress in Montreal. We lean on her work in both of our books, The Self-Driven Child and What You Say. And it's really a lovely way to think about this. If you're trying to help me understand kind of, or explore, Ned, what's going on? You seem pretty intense about this. Is it a brand new situation? I don't know what to do. Is it unpredictable? That's why traffic is so tough, right? Before COVID, and everyone is a kind of potential vector of death. For most kids, it was really threat to ego, right? So do I look stupid? Do I look foolish? Do people think I'm not cool enough? And then the last one is a low sense of control. And this low sense of control, it turns out, is the most stressful thing that a human nervous system can experience. It's the worst. We can handle novelty, unpredictability, and even perceived threats so long as we feel like there's something we can do. Actually, there's an educator in Ukraine who reached out to me and said, what do you suggest? What's your advice, Ned, for me to tell parents what to do in Ukraine? And I'm sort of like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, what do I know about war? And I said, but one of the things I came back with is if you're a parent, if you can give kids something to do that feels even slightly constructive, right? Being able to do something and feeling like I'm contributing in a meaningful way is super, super powerful. And this idea of a sense of control is actually the genesis around the central idea of why we wrote The Self-Driven Child. And Bill and I were writing this and said, what's the organizing principle? And it's this. And we think about a sense of control in two domains. And this I hope is helpful for folks when we look at the advice we have hereafter. When you think about a sense of control, the two domains are the subjective sense of autonomy, that I'm in charge to a degree, that this is my life, that I'm not being told what to do all the time and sort of hopeless, helpless, powerless, overwhelmed by all the people telling me what to do. And the brain state that supports it. So if we went back to that slide of the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, this is really powerful stuff. There's a guy named Steve Mayer who wrote who is most well known for doing the work on what's called learned helplessness. And in this paradigm experiment, they had these two rats in a little cage and their tails are at the back and they get shocked. And it's not happy and the cortisol explodes. But they did a neat thing where they had a little wheel and rat A could spin the wheel and it stopped the shock. Rat B spun the wheel, nothing happened. Rat A, when he spins the wheel, gets this massive activation of the prefrontal cortex and it dampens down the stress response. So he's getting shocked. Oh, because when he spun the wheel, it attenuated the shock. It stopped the shock. And so he realized, oh, I have something I can do in a hard situation. So what's cool is after the experience of shock, stop the wheel, shock, spin the wheel, stop the shock, spin the wheel, stop the shock, you get this great kind of connection between these two parts of the brain. Then they can put him in the same situation, disconnect the wheel. He still goes into coping mode. His prefrontal cortex still engages. They can put him in other scary situations. He doesn't freak out. He doesn't run away. He goes into coping mode. So the experience of having a sense of control and a way to cope with something that's hard generalizes. And so this is really, really powerful stuff. And so as complicated as tests can be, when we can increase a sense of control, kids not only do better because it dampens down the stress response, but we're actually wiring brains to be able to handle stressful situations and the generalized kind of across their entire life. It's really a cool thing.
Oh, before we get to that slide.
Yeah.
I want to get there, but before we get there, I think this is one of the ways that I see this coming up with parents in early years of schooling and testing is responsibility for studying. If I know that if I'm studying for this test and I don't do well in it, the number of times that I have seen parents apologize to a teacher when a student does poorly on a test because, oh, I forgot to remind him and it wasn't his fault. And like, please don't be mad at him. Like, he's really smart and he really cares. And could he retake it? And that's all incredibly loving and kind and well-meaning and might in fact be true. Sometimes it is your mom's fault. I was late for school a lot. I didn't drive, but I think that we start developing that pattern early. And then we lose a sense internally that I have control over my performance, that I have control over my options to prepare for this test.
Well, I think that's exactly right. So we talk about in both books we talk about parents being a consultant to their kids, right? You offer help, you offer advice, but you don't act like you're responsible for the kid getting the work done, because ultimately that weakens him and gives him a message that someone other than him, rather than them, is responsible for their success in life. And that's a terrible message to give to kids.
Right. I write college lists for a lot of students.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I write a suggested list, I always say, this is not your college list. You have to write your college list. I already went to college. But this is some ideas because I know some things about it that you don't. So when we're thinking about that, as a parent is trying to responsibly figure out how do I manage these things for myself so that
yes. And let me make one quick point I forgot before we jump into this. So to your point about homework of parents wanting to be responsible, it's so normal, right? Because as parents, you're here because you love your kids and you want them to be successful. That's kind of goes with a job and having lovable kids, right? The challenge is with this sense of control, and we want kids to have this as much as they can handle. Now, there's a caveat to you don't want kids to be responsible for things they can't handle, right? If you were good enough, you get into Stanford. That's not okay because it's so unpredictable, right? You can do everything right and still not get in. So we don't want to, be responsible for things we actually can't control. But with parents, because we want to help, we oftentimes jump in ways that actually work against a kid's sense of control. So in our second book, What Do You Say? We talk about this wonderful research of a woman named Jessie Borelli out of the University of California, Irvine. And I love this experiment.
My favorite part of the book.
Oh, it's so fun. She's so cool. They bring in these teenagers, right? 12 and 13-year-old kids, and they plunk them down in front of a computer. And they give them a digital puzzle and say, we're going to have you figure this out, right? But hold tight one second. We're going to bring in your parent, in this case, all moms, and they sit mom right next to them. And the one instruction they give to mom is, just don't tell them what to do. We're really trying to measure how the kids can do this, right? So you can do an attaboy, attaboy, Ned, attaboy. Okay, you're doing great on this, but just don't let them do it themselves. Okay, awesome. So the puzzle looks easy. Turns out it's not, because psychologists are a little bit tricky sometimes. And so the kid thinks, I'm going to crush this, and they don't. And when they start to realize this, they get frustrated. And when they start to get frustrated, they start to get stressed. And you can tell it's because they put a heart rate monitor on the kid. And it goes up and up and up and up and up. And the mom is sitting there like, and all she's been told is she can't help, right? Which is a terrible place to be because stress is contagious. So your kid is starting to get stressed. You feel it. And you've been told, don't help. And so their heart goes up and up and up. And eventually all of them, they just lose it because they're wired to help their kids, and they break the rule and they start telling the kid, no, sweetheart, over there, try left. No, your other left, blah, blah, blah. And finally being able to do something, feeling no longer helpless or powerless or sidelined, feeling a sense of control, mom's stress goes down. Oh, there's a problem. The kids keeps going up because the kid felt like he was in charge of the computer or the remote control or whatever, and it's now been taken away. And so this is hard. And obviously as parents, our job we're inclined to want to try to help. And we're not saying don't help your kids. It's all about the how. That's really what both of our books are about. So let's go back to that slide about some of the things that we can do.
Can I tell you one more story?
Oh, please. We love stories.
This is my other favorite. So, apparently all my stories tonight are about 10th grade boys. Ned and I were talking about this particular group of boys earlier today. When I was a high school principal, there was one particular history class that I had very poorly scheduled. So there were 23 students in the class, and 17 of them had an accommodation plan that requested preferential seating. So Oof. 17 of these kids should have been sitting in the front row. Oof. That's tough to do. And it just so happened, many of these kids were friends with one another. Many of them were boys, and many of them were on a couple of our strongest athletic teams. So they nice. Were big, energetic, friendly boys who weren't all in the position they should be in the classroom. So classroom was sometimes a struggle, and some things ensued. Was not always the most well-behaved class. So in the course of the year, as we were trying to help manage this behavior and help them grow and learn, I would have some meetings with their parents. And one mom in particular, her main response, she was embarrassed, she was angry, she was frustrated with her son. She knew he could behave better than this. And so her response every time was, well, let me come in there. You let me come in there and I will handle this and this behavior will stop. And I don't know what is happening in that classroom, but you let me come in there and I will fix it. And probably she would have, but only while she was there. And I said to her, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but if that was working, he wouldn't be doing this. So we need to figure out a way for his behavior to be able to change in a way that he is in charge of, because you actually can't come to history class every day.
Right. So it's pivot from thinking about our job to make our kids be well controlled to make them be self-controlled. Right? And then in order to do that, they have to have the sense that they're responsible for their schoolwork, their own performance, their, SAT prep, whatever it happens to be.
Right. But as a parent, that is actually really scary and hard to do. So now we'll finally get to the next slide.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do next, Ned?
So these things all really fall in the category. Talked again about a sense of control of one, this subjective sense of autonomy, and two, the brain state that supports it. So these are all things that support that brain state. So, I mean, we could spend an entire hour simply talking about sleep, but the couple big things to know. One is that sleep insufficiency fills the brain with cortisol, the same neurotransmitter, the same stress hormone as stress does. So if you really want to develop a nice anxiety disorder, keep on going and develop depression, all you really got to do is be too tired and too stressed for too long. Sleep is just incredibly restorative. And I think Charlene will share later a bunch of articles for people to take a look at. A huge deal. Exercise, incredibly valuable. There's an article, a wonderful research about how exercise on a regular basis and what's called neurogenesis, new brain cells that are being created. Those nerve cells, those neurons are not only faster, they're smarter, they respond more quickly, but they also, in the presence of a stressor, react and then calm back down. And an increase in a brain chemical called GABA, which basically just tells your brain it's okay, and they calm back down. Meditation is a huge deal. We talk in both books about both mindfulness meditation as a tool in the moment, but also transcendental meditation, which Bill and I both practice, as a tool for really lowering the baseline level of stress in a nervous system, because the healthy nervous system is low. And then the presence of a stressor responds intensely and then goes back to low quickly. And that's what we really want. The feeling safe is that from our perspective, we want home to feel like a safe base. Because if a kid is afraid that, true or not, but afraid that if they screw up, they make a mistake, they fall short, they're going to get blasted by their parents, or the parents are just going to be so upset and go to pieces about how terrible this was, then they don't share those hard feelings with their parents. And this is really not good for a couple of reasons. One, Tina Payne Bryson, we're huge fans of, Whole Brain Child, a bunch of other wonderful books, makes the point of name it to tame it. Right. And so when you can share hard feelings with someone, right, it makes a big difference. If there's a silver bullet against the effects of stress on developing brains, it is going to be a close connection between a kid and a parent or another caregiver. But also, all emotions are contagious. Fear is wildly contagious, but so is calm. Calm is contagious is a mantra of the Navy SEALs. So it's not always, in some ways, it's not obvious to parents that if you have a kid who's struggling because of stress, struggling because of motivation, that one of the things we can do is to be more tranquil and placid and say, well, I'm confident this is going to work out well enough. Do I know how? Can I know that for sure? No, but I'm confident this will work out well enough. And when we walk that walk, we use that talk, it says to kids, I'm not worried about the fact that this is really hard for you right now. And it makes it much easier for kids to not be overly worried about what they are right now. And if we go back to Yatesdson, we know when kids are too stressed, the major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. So we can be more calm. We calm kids' hard feelings. It lowers their stress and makes them actually back to the place of optimal arousal, where they're more likely to get at doing the things that they know they should be, but they've been kind of avoiding because they felt so intense about it.
Which means, Ned, this list on the left here and a ton of other strategies that we have for coping are important things for parents to be doing. I have a family that I have worked with for a number of years that I really adore. A lot of anxiety. They've named it. They're working on it. They have a lot of things going on. But one of the strategies we've learned is that the mom just calls me. When she has something she needs to panic about and she's worried
Yep.
about telling the kids, she just calls me. I just take it, I handle all that, take it all and put it over here for her. And then she's able to go back and create her home which is in fact a very safe home. And she wants to make sure the kids know that. But it took her a long time to figure out how to not be giving her contagious fear over to her children.
I love that the two of you figured that out together and that you served that role for her, because all of us need someone to tell our problems to. And so in her sharing her fears with you, it sort of unburdens her and gives her the space to make it easy for her kids to share their problems with her. I love it. I'll switch over to the kind of increasing the support system. There are kids who absolutely need more support. Kids who have anxiety, kids who have depression, kids with ADHD, ASD. I mean, we're back to those individual differences. Some kids, hashtag I got this, right? Just give me a credit card and I'm ready to run my own life, right? And other kids where everything's hard, right? Attention is hard and learning is hard and emotional and friends and everything is hard, right? And they need more support. The challenge is, how do we as parents and educators give young folks all the help that they need, but not in a way that feels really controlling? There's a story in our book where Bill, again, is a clinical neuropsychologist and worked with kids where things aren't going well. And this parent met a school meeting, and the learning support person was saying, well, it takes 2 learning people, 2 tutors, and both parents to get this kid to do any homework. And he said, you gotta stop this immediately. Because when adults spend 80 units of energy trying to get a kid to do 20, and they get more intense, they go to 90, the kid goes to 10. And so what we talk about is, as parents and as educators, thinking of ourselves as consultants. We say, hey, Katie, I got an idea on that. I got a suggestion that helped me in the past. Do you want to hear about it? And by doing this in this way, it lowers the stress, and you can say, no, I've got it. Okay. Or thanks. Yeah. Because when you feel a sense of control, you can take it or not. It sort of brings down the shields of defensiveness and makes it a lot more likely that you're going to hear, be open to the suggestion that I like to share. Right. The other thing I'll say, I'm going to jump out over the supportive statements for a moment. Plan B thinking. All of our fear as parents is really not about the present. It's about the future. We worry that if our kid's a C student, they're going to have a C life, and that breaks our heart. So then, doggone it, we're going to do anything to have them not be a C student. I was just talking with Bill. Talking with a parent who this kid had in high school. Get this, a 1.7 GPA. It is hard to get a 1.7 GPA. He joined the Navy. He tried to become a Navy SEAL. He had a heart condition. He couldn't do that. He did this thing back and forth. Navy SEAL again, in and out. Probably 22. Got pretty good and pretty high up in what he was doing in the Navy. And his mom said, well, if you're interested in going to college, I'd be happy to support that. Well, he had really changed a lot between age 17 and 23. The kid, I swear, is now at Harvard. Nobody would have predicted that with a 1.7. But we know that the prefrontal cortex is the slowest part of the brain to develop, right? So when we can say that there are these alternate routes to get there, that Sonia Lupien of the Nuts said that the single best thing to lower stress is plan B thinking. This parachute doesn't work, we got another one. If you only got one, oh boy, that's really intense. And I mentioned, go ahead.
Here's the thing about development in schools in particular. We only have one way that we measure when you are ready to go to school. We've decided it's 5.5. You're ready to learn. I once was in an international education course in grad school, and our professor said, well, why is that? And we all said, well, because it's the right time, because that's when you're ready. And she said, well, there is, and I forget what country it was, but there is a country in South America that until quite recently, until maybe 20 or 30 years ago, did it by height. When you are this tall, you're ready to go to school. And we all were like, well, that's crazy. And she was like, how is that any more or less arbitrary than when you're 6? And wow. I think that is one of for a student like the young man or the now actual man that you just described, when you are misplaced in your school environment and it's not working for you, it's very hard to get that back. because you just might not be in that developmental place yet. And you have to get there before you can cycle back and get back to where you need to be.
It's such a good point, and I heard a talk years ago, but when Dr. Martha Denkla, who was at Kennedy Krieger at Hopkins here, and one of the foremost authorities early on in the 70s, starting to wrap their heads around ADHD and executive functions. And she pointed out that the average 4-year-old girl is where the average 5-year-old boy is in terms of executive functions, right? And of course, this is on average, and nobody lives the average. There are people who are ahead, there are people who are behind. And so paying attention to this is super important.
Yep.
I'll talk for just a moment about supportive statements. And this again is for kids who, particularly when kids are anxious. What happens when kids are anxious is it doesn't stay a kid's anxiety problem for very long. Parents get roped into it, right? And they get pulled in to help it. And they make accommodations, right? We either end up protecting kids, right? Okay, yeah, we don't have to fly for vacation. We'll pick a place that we can drive. Or for a kid who's perfectionist, well, I'll read your paper one more time. It's fine, sweetheart, right? And the challenge is when we do that short term, it makes the kid feel better because the stressor goes away. But we don't learn to handle stressful situations, stressful things, unless we handle stressful things. There's no other way to do it. You can't intellectualize it. And so when we as parents get looped into, protecting kids from these, where they're missing the opportunity to learn to cope with things that are hard. The challenge is what we often want to do is either tell kids they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling. Oh, Katie, it's not that big a deal. Come on, it's 7th grade. Are you serious, right? Or I know, gosh, your teacher's kind of mean. I'll talk to her for you, right? And both of those seem fine, but they really have a problem. So Ellie Leibowitz, I know that Charlene and Bev, you've had as a guest, who's fantastic, a book called Breaking Free of Anxiety and OCD, Childhood Anxiety and OCD. And what he talks about is a program that helps lower anxiety only by parents changing their steps as much as if the kids had done cognitive behavioral therapy. And what they do with this is you simply make supportive statements and then you withdraw the accommodation. So we can use the supportive statements just even now. And you simply say, boy, I get that this is really intense for you, but I'm also confident you can handle it. I was just talking with a parent today, kid is sophomore, thinks she needs a 35 or 36 on the ACT. Nobody needs a 30. She wants it, and I'm all down with wants, but nobody needs that because at least test optional, give me a break. And she said, well, I keep telling her this is silly, she doesn't need to do it. And I said, well, that is part of the equation, but it feels invalidated. So this girl is obsessively looking at college admissions rates at different places. And my advice was to say something like, I get that this is really intense for you. You care so much about doing well in school and going to college that's right for you. Your high school is really intense. And it makes sense to me that you're already stressed about this by the end of sophomore year. However, I don't think that this is the right time for us to be worried about this. I think we can worry about this later. I can't keep you from worrying about this, but I simply am not going to be part of these conversations right now. I'll have these conversations with you 6 months from now. So she's not trying to change the kid's behavior at all. She's simply saying, I recognize that you have reasons to want to do this, but I'm confident you can handle this without me. And I'm just going to step out of this. And so when you think about perfectionistic kids who want you to quiz them for the 17th time, you don't learn to handle that uncertainty, that those new situations, even the threat of a B-, unless you actually go through that a little bit.
All right,
So
that's what we can do.
Yeah,
what can they do?
Thank you. And I'm watching the time. I know we get carried away with this. So tools for learning, tools for performance. So we will send around a link. There's an incredible book called Make It Stick. Henry Roediger, Peter Brown, the third person is escaping my head right now. But it talks about how kids can practice. Because basically when we talk about underperformance in tests, there's two possible sort of weaknesses. One, how do kids learn? And they really learn things in ways that they actually stick, as opposed to I learn it and then I forget it. And then also kind of what goes on in performance. So the biggest thing here is what's called the testing effect. They actually coined this as a wiki page about this. And it's simply that we oftentimes will look at notes and think, oh, I've got this. And then you get to the test and it falls apart. If we can put ourselves under test-like conditions, we want to clarify whether we know what we know or not. It helps us figure out how to spend our time in a more effective way. And it's a little bit more intense. So we don't want to go from no stress to high stress. So testing yourself is a really big deal. If I go back to a moment to the COMT gene, right? The worriers and the warriors, the end of that article, and we'll share this as well, said that there's actually, this is amazing, for people who are the worriers, they too can learn to handle really intense things. All that they need is more practice under mildly to then moderately stressful situations. And their brain gets used to it because we have that very same wiring we were talking about, Meyer, with the rats and the prefrontal cortex engages. So we don't want it to be passive learning. We want it to be active learning. And the last thing, because I know there are probably a lot of really good questions, is emergency stress relief, laughing, singing, deep breathing. These are all things, again, from Sonia Lupien, who is just fantastic. Box breathing was actually a method of deep breathing. We'll share that link as well, where it's sort of, inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4, round and round and round. This was created by a Navy SEAL. Navy SEALs, they have the calm is contagious, so it's kind of a big deal. Hulk smash.
Because they have a stressful job.
They do. I think that's right. I
think they do.
Right. Hulk smash. I'm laughing about this. Basically, I fell on a study of NIMH, National Institutes of Mental Health. Anxiety does really bad things to cognitive functions, but there's another pretty powerful emotion that doesn't mess with executive functions: anger. So when you're thinking about the math test or the SAT or ACT and how much you don't like them, rather than being afraid, you're much better off being really, really pissed off at them. Doesn't mess with your performance nearly as much. And then the last thing, get your swagger on. This is Cyan Beilock wrote a book called Choke, and I love it. And she basically talks about the prefrontal cortex is the brain system involved if you're a predator, if you're going off after the, score the goal, win the goal, get the guy, get the girl, whatever, right? And it's goal-directed behavior, all those executive functions. The amygdala is the scared bunny, right? And there's no thinking, there's just run for your life. So she said, going into a test, anything that can help you get your swagger on. So listen to music that gets you fired up. I have a whole article about, kids wearing clothes that makes them feel like #I'm all that. As well as writing exercises that make kids be mindful of all the things that they're already good at that are outside of this test. We know that when, as parents and as college counselors and as tutors, the first question I always ask a kid is about their soccer game, or how was that risotto you made, or whatever. When we can put interest into kids beyond their grades and scores in college, they feel so much less stress, and it's much easier for them to perform at a high level for those grades and scores in college to the degree that those matter for them.
All right, questions. Sorry that Ned and I talk a lot.
Well, thank you, Ned and Katie. No, we've never seen Ned talk too much. That does not happen.
You're so kind.
All right, you're right. You're right. We have some wonderful questions. So let's start with an easy one, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. I was struck by your comment that a major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. How do you help your kid with test anxiety stop avoiding and start studying without stressing them out more?
So I had a couple of kids I worked a couple of years ago, and they were fraternal twins, and one was super academic, read like an 18th century Russian literature for fun, like that's a thing. And her sister, nobody I know, but here we go, right? So her sister was this artist, and a musician, but also anxious and depressed, and just a complicated kid. And so she's going through all this stuff. And at some point she stopped, she said, "Do I have to take this test?" And I said, "No, you were born at the right time in American education. Test optional is the best thing in the world. Go to fairtest.org. Shout out to my friends, Bob Schaefer and Akil Bello. It's the best thing in the world because we're now in a position where kids may want to take the test, but nobody except for MIT, but you can live without going to MIT. You don't have to take this, right?" And so I said to her, "My goodness, no. Oh, and by the way, you took a practice ACT and you got a 24. And I looked up the schools that you're interested in." She was, again, an artist. "You know what you need to get into those schools? A 25. So I'm confident that if we can get you like a bagel the morning of the test, you can roll in there and get a 25, no question asked." So, but then I explained to her about anxiety, that when with untreated anxiety, because we avoid the world that you feel comfortable in operating, you pull things off. So I gently said, when we do this, the world that you will feel comfortable to operate in will get smaller and smaller and smaller. You, my friend, are an artist. I don't have those skills. I want you to have the biggest friggin' canvas you can possibly come up with. So this is the best thing in the world because we can work super hard at this. And if you don't do well, you don't have to share it. And if you do, make your parents take you out for ice cream. So she's like, okay, this is great because now I feel safe. I wasn't telling her all the reasons she had to. I told her all the reasons why she didn't have to. So she engages, she takes her first practice test, she gets a 29. I'm like, yeah, she's pissed. And I'm like, she wants a 30 because her knucklehead sister is going to get a 30, whatever. And she needed that at least for her own pride, which she didn't need, but she wanted it. I'm totally down with. She eventually ends up getting a 32 because we unclenched her brain and it was now something that she wanted to do rather than she had to do. And Bill Stixrud, Worrier here, would remind us that most mental health is changing thinking from I have to I want to. And I'll make one more point on that. We talk about in What Do You Say that people are ambivalent about change. Your child, I'm guessing it's a son, but I don't know, I forget which is, your child has reasons to want to do well in this. You know, my parents will be proud of me. I'll have more college choices. My friends will think I'm smarter. You know, a bunch of, legitimate reasons, but also reasons not to do it. This is stupid. The people who make this test are kind of mean. I could be spending that time with my friends and this is the important part, I could work really hard at this and get a score that went, and then I might actually know what the limits of my abilities are, my alleged intellectual abilities are to the degree that tests measure that. And that's really scary. So if you get a chance, in our book, we have a chapter about this ambivalence. And what we do is we use open-ended questions, right? We use reflective listening and we wait for kids to articulate for them reasons themselves. But when we argue one side of the equation, they argue the other. So right now, my suggestion is to really take a step back, because the more that you argue how important this is, the more that your kid is likely to argue this is stupid and I don't want to do it. And we don't change that. Just like we don't get people to stop using substances that are unhealthy. We don't change that until we change the energy.
Thank you, Ned. I love that. Like you pointed out, both of you, that disengaged kids don't mean they're not interested or they don't care.
Yep, they so often care desperately, but the only thing that feels safe to them is to not even enter the game at all.
Absolutely. So here is a related question and a really good one. Nikki asks, assuming a child is adequately prepared, what would you offer as the most psychologically appropriate response to a kid who says, I'm going to fail, I'm going to do so poorly? You want to say, nah, you won't fail. Be realistic, just do your best. Do you have a good medium to encourage but not dismantle their confidence for a kid who says things like that? I'm gonna fail.
So a kid who says I'm gonna fail, and get you. And so what? The two things that we go. This is sort of back to the LA Lee books. Because I'm gonna fail, right? You either tend to say something like, "Oh, sweetheart, that's not true." Look, and we talk them out of those feelings, or we say, "Well, if you'd study, of course you'd do great, right?" But what the kid is really saying is, I'm really scared, right? And they're what they call handicapping, trying to set the expectations low. And this is actually a huge opportunity for you to help, but the kid isn't asking in a way that it's obvious. My advice is to say something like, so we use empathy and validation so that we can then open the door to be a consultant and get to problem solving. So you say something like, oof, boy, that sounds pretty tough. It sounds like you get some really hard feelings about this test. It must be pretty hard, huh? And then you wait. And the kid's like, I say, God, it's so stupid. I don't understand this all. The teacher doesn't explain anything. And you say, boy, that must be awfully frustrating to sit there day after day and be confused. I'd be upset about that too. And I don't understand. And because when you do this, when it's this empathy and validation, and what Aron McGann, who's another wonderful guest of you can repeat back. So what I got from that is you feel like, and you repeat it back word for word as much as you can. That's what calms the hard emotions. And then if you prime the kid, you can say something like, I have a thought or two on there that might help. Do you want to hear them? And we use empathy and validation first to calm those hard emotions. And then we gently offer a suggestion. Or they say, you don't even ask a suggestion to do, but I say, well, for what it's worth, from my perspective, you don't have to be great at everything to be successful in life. Or I love you no matter how well you do. I love you no matter how hard you try. If you don't want to do this at all, I don't care. And Katie has some great ideas, but I'll tell you one quick story. My daughter, who's now a senior in high school, who is the coolest person in the world, but she is complicated. Partly she's got at least 20 IQ points in me, so that's a little bit annoying, but she's also been anxious and depressed. So she gets rigid, she's complicated. She spent 3 months of 8th grade in school refusal. She just got into college, so it's her happy ending to this. But man, oh man, for a guy who helps people get into college, 3 months of school refusal. And I was just trying to keep her going to school and going through school, and we didn't quite make it. And she came to me and she said, I'm going to fail this history test. She hated her teacher. She hated this. She hated the whole thing. And I looked at her and I said, are you sure? And she said, yes. And I said, are you sure? Not like just like a 60, not like a 70, but like full on fail. Yes, I am. And I said, okay, I pledge to you, if you will go and take that test, because all I really care is about you being in there with school with your friends. If you promise that you will fail that test, I will immediately sign you out of class and take you out to lunch, and we will have ice cream for lunch on a random Wednesday. And people are like, are you insane? And I go back to the thing I said before, that if there is a silver bullet against the effects of stress on developing brains, and then pulling that stress out so kids can actually be more motivated, it's the depth of that connection. And my saying, I couldn't give a rat's patooey about this history. I care about you. I care about you. And I've got your back every step of the way. And if you go down in flames and you get a 50, you know what? I still love you, and I still love ice cream. So that was, Katie, you have some other thoughts on that too?
I wanted to just add on to your first thought that when you gently offer, hey, I've got some ideas if you want to hear them,
Yep.
They might say no, or they might say not now. And that's also something that I have to be like, okay, well, that's cool. I've got some ideas. I also a lot of times have kids, and this is not so much as a parent as it is as an educator. I have conversations that are along the sort of plan B thinking with this. Like, okay, what if you fail? People fail stuff. I failed stuff. Like that happens. And so I think it's sometimes it's sort of a name it to tame it. Like if I've said, but I'm going to fail and my mom's going to kill me. I'm not, that's not a thing I'm going to do. So let's see what happens if you fail. Then you sort of can feel, they can feel their way through that anxiety as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We heard a talk the other day about that clinician talking about anticipating what the thing is, and then could you cope with that? And the kind of, hard thing happens, what's your plan for that? What's your plan for that? What's your plan for that? Because again, when are anxious and we catastrophize, right? We imagine the worst possible thing. And if we can, with lowering the energy, just the way you described it, Katie, I think it's lovely, anticipate the thing that could happen and say, can we figure out how we could handle that? And to the degree to which we can forecast and say, I can handle that. I wouldn't like it. You don't have to like it, but I could handle it. It's kind of prospective plan B thinking, prospective sense of control also lowers the threat that's in the moment.
Great.
And parents, those of you who know our program have heard us talk and host Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson often, but their book, The Self-Driven Child, is truly the best parenting book I've read in 30 years. And if you're going to read one book, read that one, because all of the advice that Ned and Katie are talking about tonight is in that book. And it really, truly has to do with lowering anxiety by giving kids more autonomy and control. It really works. So thank you so much, Ned Johnson and Katie Dunn, for a fantastic evening. Everybody is so grateful. Any last parting comments from the two of you?
For me,
it's a dangerous question.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think it's so clear that we are living in a moment right now where we are all experiencing pretty constant low-level anxiety. And the fact that 500 parents were able to carve out the time to sign up for this and think about, okay, what I want to be doing is helping manage this for my families, or for my students or for my colleagues or whatever. I think that's the way we get ourselves out of this mess. That's the way we sort of lose some of the power that this undue stress can have for kids. So I'm just very grateful that folks are here.
And it's such a good point. I would add to that, Katie helps people get into college. I help people get into college. We, like you, are interested in your kids being as successful as they possibly can and everything that matters to them, right? Friends and school and sports and coding and everything, right? Because when kids work hard to develop themselves, it's good for them, for the lives that they're building. It's good for your family. It's good for your schools. It's good for your community. It's good for the whole darn country, right? To develop talent. But we want to do this in a way that's sustainable, right? And also for kids who are slow out of the gate or haven't launched yet, to have this very confidence like that, like the Navy SEAL guy who's now at Harvard, of plan B thinking, right? Because from my perspective, and there's certainly all the research in the book, and I say this as a test prep guy, that the most important outcome of adolescence and college is not where you go to college. It's the brain that you're developing, that you're going to carry into college, you're going to carry into the adult world, right? And we can do this in a way that's balanced. And if we can lower the fear. And one of the ways that we lower the fear is, again, this connection. Again, I'll just say it one more time. If there's a silver bullet against the effect of stress, and the things that Katie just talked about, and boy, it's been 2 years, it's how closely we hold our kids, how much they feel we've got their back, we love them no matter what they do, or how well, or even how much effort they put in. And curiously, if you look at the model of self-determination theory, the closer the connection that we have to our child, the more likely they are to feel motivated, and the more likely they are to buy into our worldview, our values, and we have to be close enough to them to really be able to help. When we're not close to them, when they push us away for all reasons, good or bad, we're not in a position to help. And that's what you're trying to do. You love your kids and you want to help them in all the ways that you can. So prioritize that priority. Just love your kids, even when they're messy. And I'm confident that things will work out better than you fear they might.
Those are beautiful parting words, Ned Johnson, and I love all the floating hearts and thumbs up.
I've never seen that. That's so fun.
Thank you, everybody, for being with us, and really beautiful parting comments. Again, thank you, Katie Dunn and Ned Johnson, for a brilliant conversation. And thank you all for being with us tonight. You were a great audience with great questions. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you, Ned and Katie. Take care, everybody. Good night. Hope to see you again soon.